Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, the USS Liberty, looking out at the dark space ahead. His crew had been exploring this region for 3 months now, mapping new star systems and looking for signs of alien life. Had found nothing but empty planets and dead rocks floating in the void. The Liberty was one of Earth's newest exploration ships. It carried a crew of 200 people, all volunteers, who wanted to help humanity reach out into the galaxy. Jake had been chosen to lead this mission because of his calm nature and good judgment. He was 42 years old, with gray hair and kind eyes that made people trust him right away. "Captain, we're picking up something strange," said Lieutenant Tony Rodriguez from his station. Tony was the ship's security chief, a tough man who had served in Earth's military for 15 years before joining the space program. His job was to keep the crew safe during their long journey into unknown space. Jake walked over to Tony's station and looked at the display screen. There were red dots blinking on the radar, showing something big floating about 50,000 miles away. It looked like a ship, but it wasn't moving and wasn't sending out any signals. "What do you think it is?" Jake asked. "Hard to say, sir. It's definitely artificial, made by someone with technology. But it's just drifting there, like a dead whale in the ocean," Tony replied. Dr. Lisa Hayes, the ship's science officer, came up behind them. Lisa was 35 years old and one of the smartest people Jake had ever met. She studied alien life forms, and her job was to help humans understand any new species they might meet during their travels. "The shape is wrong for any Earth ship," Lisa said, studying the screen. "Look at those curves and angles. No human engineer would design something like that." Jake felt his heart beat faster. This could be it, the first proof that intelligent aliens existed. For years, humans had wondered if they were alone in the universe. Many people hoped they would find friends among the stars. Others worried they might find enemies instead. "Take us closer, but keep our distance," Jake ordered the pilot. "I want to see what we're dealing with before we make any decisions." The Liberty moved slowly toward the mysterious object. As they got closer, the ship's cameras began to show them details that made everyone on the bridge go quiet. The alien vessel was huge, maybe twice the size of the Liberty. Its hull was dark gray metal, covered in scars and burn marks. Parts of it looked like they had been hit by weapons fire. "It's been in a fight," Tony said quietly. "Look at those holes in the side. Something with serious firepower attacked this ship." Kate Sullivan, the ship's chief engineer, joined them on the bridge. Kate was a small woman with red hair and hands that were always covered in grease from working on machines. She could fix anything that broke on the Liberty, and she understood technology better than almost anyone. "The design is incredible," Kate said, pointing at the alien ship. "Look how they've arranged the engines. I've never seen anything like it. This is definitely not human technology." Jake made his decision. "Prepare a boarding party. I want to know what happened to that ship and who built it." Lisa stepped forward. "Captain, I should go with the boarding team. If there are aliens on that ship, dead or alive, I need to study them. This could be the most important discovery in human history." Jake nodded. "Tony, you're leading the boarding party. Take Lisa and Kate with you. And take 4 security officers, just in case. We don't know what we might find over there." An hour later, the boarding party was ready. They wore special spacesuits that would protect them from radiation and alien germs. Each person carried a small computer that could translate alien languages. Although no one knew if it would actually work, the shuttle bay doors opened, and Tony's team flew across the empty space between the two ships. As they got closer to the alien vessel, they could see that it was even more damaged than they had thought. There were holes everywhere, and some sections looked like they had been melted by intense heat. "There's an opening in the side," Tony reported over the radio. "Looks like a cargo bay door. We're going in." The inside of the alien ship was dark and cold. The boarding party turned on their flashlights and began to explore. The corridors were wider than human hallways, and the ceiling was higher too. Whoever built this ship was bigger than humans. "The air is breathable," Lisa said, checking her instruments. "Oxygen levels are good. Temperature is cold, but not freezing." They moved deeper into the ship, looking for signs of the crew. The walls were covered in strange symbols that none of them could read. Some of the symbols were glowing with a soft blue light, which meant the ship still had some power running through it. Kate stopped at a control panel and began studying the alien technology. This is amazing. Their computers are so much more advanced than ours. I can't even begin to understand how they work. That's when they heard a weak sound coming from somewhere deeper in the ship. It sounded like someone crying or moaning in pain. The team looked at each other with surprise. "There's someone alive on this ship," Tony said into his radio. "We're going to investigate." They followed the sound through more corridors until they reached what looked like a cargo area. Tony opened the door carefully and shined his light. Inside, what he saw made him gasp in shock. The cargo bay was full of cages. Hundreds of metal cages, each one just big enough for a person to lie down in. Most of the cages were empty, but some still contained alien beings. The creatures inside looked sick and weak, and many of them were clearly dead. "My God," Lisa whispered. "This is a slave ship." The aliens in the cages were different from each other. Some looked like giant lizards with scales and long tails. Others had fur and looked almost like wolves that walked on two legs. A few had blue skin and large eyes that reminded the humans of children. One of the lizard creatures was still alive, though barely. It raised its head when the humans approached and tried to speak. The words came out as hissing sounds that the translation computer couldn't understand at first. Lisa knelt down next to the cage and spoke softly to the creature. "We're here to help. We're not going to hurt you." The alien looked at her with yellow eyes that showed both fear and hope. Slowly, the translation computer began to work. The creature's words came through as broken English. "Help, ... Others still alive ... They come back." "They always come back ... Who comes back?" Lisa asked gently. "The masters ... The ones who take us ... Sell us. We are ... Property." Tony felt sick to his stomach. These aliens weren't just prisoners. They were slaves being transported to be sold like animals. Kate had been exploring other parts of the cargo bay. She called out to the others. "You need to see this. There are records here. Computer files." This ship was carrying over 300 slaves when it was attacked. Lisa stayed with the injured alien while Tony and Kate examined the ship's computer. Records what they found was even worse than they had imagined. The files showed routes between dozens of star systems, all marking places where slaves were bought and sold. There were prices listed for different types of aliens, like they were farm animals at a market. "This is just one ship," Kate said quietly. "According to these records, there are hundreds more ships like this one. Maybe thousands." The injured alien grabbed Lisa's hand through the bars of its cage. "Your people... humans. They know about us?" "No," Lisa said honestly. "We didn't know, but we know now." "They will come for you too," the alien whispered. "When you are ready, you have enough people. They will take you all." Tony's blood ran cold. "What do you mean the hegemony? They watch... They wait. Take whole worlds when the time is right. Your people. Marked for harvest." The three humans looked at each other in horror. They'd come out here looking for new friends among the stars. Instead, they had found proof that somewhere in the galaxy, there were aliens who saw humans as nothing more than future slaves. Jake's voice came over the radio. "Boarding team, report. What's your status?" Tony took a deep breath before answering. "Captain, you need to prepare the medical bay. We have survivors, and they need help immediately. Answer ... We need to contact Earth right away. We found something that changes everything." As the team worked to free the surviving aliens from their cages, Lisa couldn't stop thinking about what the creature had told them. Somewhere out there in the dark between the stars, aliens were planning to enslave all of humanity. They were, watching and waiting for the right moment to strike. But now humans knew the truth. And that, Lisa realized, might be the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to the slavers. Because if there was one thing she knew about her species, it was that humans never responded well to bullies. And they certainly wouldn't stand by and let innocent beings suffer in chains. The war hadn't started yet, but Lisa could feel it coming. Like a storm on the horizon, the The slavers had made their biggest mistake when they let this ship be found. They had given humanity a reason to fight, and a cause worth dying for. Once humanity knew the truth, the slavers' fate was sealed. Admiral Susan Clark sat in her office at Earth Defense Command, reading Captain Morrison's report for the third time. Each time she read it, the words seemed more unbelievable. Alien slave ships. Hundreds of different species in chains. Humans. Marked for harvest like crops in a field, Susan was 58 years old and had been in charge of Earth's space defense for 12 years. She had seen a lot of strange things during her career, but nothing like this. The photos that came with Morrison's report showed creatures that looked like they had been tortured for years. Some of them were so thin, their bones showed through their skin. The rescued aliens were now in Earth's best hospitals, being cared for by doctors who had never seen anything like them before. The lizard creature that had spoken to Dr. Hayes was named Crix, and he was slowly getting stronger. Every day he told the doctors more about the horror he had lived through. Susan picked up her phone and called Commander Ryan Walsh. Ryan was her best intelligence officer, a man who could find secrets that others missed. If anyone could figure out how big this slave trade really was, it would be him. "Ryan, I need you to drop everything else you're working on," Susan said when he answered. "We have a new mission, and it's the most important thing we've ever done." Minutes later, Ryan was sitting in Susan's office, looking at the same terrible photos she had been studying. Ryan was 34 years old, with dark hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He had been hunting criminals and terrorists for most of his adult life, but this was different from anything he had ever seen. "How many ships do you think are out there?" Susan asked. Ryan shook his head. "Based on these computer files, we could be talking about thousands of ships, maybe tens of thousands. This isn't just a few criminals making money on the side. This is an entire civilization built on slavery." Susan felt sick thinking about it. "I want you to put together a team. Find out everything you can about this. Hegemony. I want to know where they operate, how many ships they have, and most importantly, when they're planning to come for us." Ryan spent the next week choosing his team carefully. He picked Dr. Amy Peterson, a woman who studied alien languages and could speak 12 different Earth languages perfectly. He also chose Lieutenant Ben Cooper, a tactical expert who understood how military forces worked and could predict what enemies might do next. The most important member of Ryan's team was Crix himself. The alien had volunteered to help humans understand his captors, even though talking about his experiences was clearly painful for him. Crix had been a slave for over 20 years, and he knew more about the hegemony than any human could learn from computer files. "They think they are the masters of the galaxy," Crix explained to the team through the translation device. His voice was rough and tired, but his yellow eyes burned with anger. "They have been taking slaves for thousands of years. Every species they meet becomes either a partner who helps them catch slaves or slaves themselves." Dr. Peterson leaned forward in her chair. "How do they choose which species to enslave?" "They look for species that are not too advanced," Crix said. "If a species has weapons that can fight back, they wait. They watch for hundreds of years sometimes, waiting for the right moment to strike." Lieutenant Cooper asked the question that everyone was thinking. What makes the right moment? Crix's lizard face showed something that might have been a smile, but it was not a happy one. When a species spreads out to many planets but before they build strong defenses, when they are scattered and cannot help each other quickly, felt his blood turn cold. Humans had been spreading out to new planets for the past 50 years. Earth had colonies on 12 different worlds now, but the defenses on those colonies were weak. If the hegemony attacked, the outer colonies would fall before Earth could send help. The team worked 18 hours a day, studying every piece of information they could find. Sarah Collins, a young intelligence officer who was good with computers, managed to break into some of the damaged files from the slave ship. What she found made everyone understand how much danger humanity was really in. "They've been watching us for 60 years, Sarah announced during one of their meetings. "Ever since we first sent signals into space, they have detailed files on our military, our population, even our different governments. She brought up images on the big screen that showed Earth from space. Red marks covered the planet, marking major cities and military bases. Numbers next to each mark showed how many slaves the hegemony expected to capture from each location. According to their calculations, Earth should provide about 8 billion slaves, Sarah continued. They've already decided which humans would be good for different types of work. They've even picked out children who would be valuable as house servants. Amy Peterson had been translating more of Crick's stories about life as a slave. The things she learned made her cry at night when she went home to her apartment. Families torn apart and sold to different buyers. Children who grew up never knowing their parents. Workers who died from exhaustion and were simply replaced with new captures. The worst part, Amy told the team, is that they don't see the slaves as people. Crick says they talk about slaves the same way we talk about farm animals. They breed them for certain traits like strength or intelligence. They train them from birth to obey without question. Ben Cooper had been studying the hegemony's military tactics. The computer files showed records of hundreds of conquests over the past 1,000 years. The pattern was always the same. Watch. Wait, then strike with overwhelming force when the target species was least prepared. They're very good at what they do, Ben reported. They've perfected the art of planetary conquest. They usually start by destroying communication systems, so the target species can't call for help. Then they land troops at major population centers and begin collecting people. Ryan put all the pieces together in a report that he knew would change human history forever. The hegemony was planning to harvest Earth within the next 20 years. They were just waiting for humans to spread out a little more, to make sure they could capture as many people as possible. Director Paul Martinez of Human Intelligence read Ryan's report in his office late one night. Paul was a calm man who rarely showed emotion, but as he read page after page of evidence, his hands began to shake with anger. The next morning, Paul called an emergency meeting with world leaders. Presidents, prime ministers, and generals from every nation on Earth gathered. In the secure conference room at United Nations headquarters, many of them had been enemies just the day before, but the threat they now faced made all their old fights seem stupid and small. President Linda Washington of the United States spoke for everyone when she saw the evidence. This changes everything. We're not talking about politics or territory anymore. We're talking about the survival of our entire species. The Chinese premier agreed. Every human on Earth is in danger. Our children, our grandchildren, everyone we love. What do we do? Asked the Prime Minister of Britain. Paul Martinez stood up and looked around the room at the most powerful people on Earth. We have two choices. We can hide and hope they never find us, or we can fight. Fight? The Russian president laughed, but it was not a happy sound. They have thousands of ships and millions of soldiers. We have never even fought a war in space. Crix had been brought to the meeting to help the human leaders understand what they faced. The alien stood up slowly, his lizard body still weak from years of abuse. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. You do not understand your own strength, he told the humans. In all my years as a slave, I met beings from hundreds of worlds. All of them were conquered because they gave up. They saw the hegemony's power and decided they could not win. He looked around the room at the faces of Earth's leaders. Oh, but you humans are different. I have watched you since you rescued me. You do not give up. Get angry when you see others being hurt, even if those others are aliens you never met. Before Crix pointed to the screen showing the hegemony's slave markets. The hegemony has never fought a species that would risk everything to free strangers. They do not understand this kind of thinking. They believe every species cares only about themselves. President Washington stood up. He's right. We can't just sit here and wait for them to come collect us like sheep. And we can't ignore the millions of beings who are suffering in chains right now. What are you suggesting? Asked the German Chancellor. I'm suggesting we show these slavers what happens when they threaten humanity, President Washington replied. I'm suggesting we go to war. The room was quiet for a long moment. Then, one by one, every leader in the room nodded their agreement. For the first time in human history, Every nation on Earth was united behind a single cause. The hegemony had made their biggest mistake. When they let that slave ship be found, they had given humanity something they had never had before: a perfect enemy. An enemy so evil that fighting them would bring out the best in human nature instead of the worst. Ryan Walsh was put in charge of gathering more intelligence about hegemony operations. Sarah Collins began working on ways to intercept their communications. Amy Peterson started training more people to speak with rescued aliens. As the meeting ended, Crix approached President Washington. General Marcus Thompson had never expected to command the largest military force in human history. 6 months ago, he had been running training exercises for Earth's small space defense fleet. Now he stood in the main command center of operation. Liberation. Watching thousands of workers build the ships that would carry humanity to war. Marcus was 55 years old. A tall man with gray hair and scars on his hands from his early years as a fighter pilot. He had fought in 3 wars. On Earth, but this was different. This time, humans were not fighting each other. They were fighting for something bigger than any one nation or planet. The Operations Center was built inside a mountain in Colorado, but it connected to similar centers in Russia, China, Japan, and 12 other countries. For the first time in human history, every nation was working together toward the same goal. The arguing and fighting that had gone on for thousands of years had stopped almost overnight when people learned about the slave ships. Dr. Peter Kim walked into the command center carrying a tablet computer full of technical reports. Peter was the head of the weapons development program, a job that had seemed impossible when he first accepted it. How do you build weapons to fight aliens whose technology is hundreds of years more advanced than yours? Why, me fought another. Breakthrough, Peter said, his voice excited. The engineering team has figured out how the hegemony shield systems work. Peter was 41 years old, small man with thick glasses, who had spent most of his life studying physics and engineering. Before the war preparation began, he had been working on peaceful projects like better space engines and communication systems. Now his job was to find ways to destroy alien ships and break down the walls of slave prisons. Marcus looked at the technical drawings on Peter's tablet. They showed complex diagrams of energy fields and power generators that seemed like magic compared to human technology. The shields work by bending space around the ship, Peter continued. Energy weapons and missiles just slide around the ship instead of hitting it. But we found a weakness. Rachel Stone and Chris Williams, 2 of Peter's best engineers, joined them at the command table. Rachel was a weapons expert who had designed many of Earth's military systems. Chris was a power systems engineer who understood how to make things work in the harsh environment of space. The shields need huge amounts of power to work, Rachel explained. If we can overload their power systems, the shields will fail for a few seconds. That's all we need to get our weapons through. Chris pointed to another part of the technical drawing. We've also learned how to copy their faster-than-light engines. The slave ship we captured had a complete engine system that we've been studying. We can build ships that are almost as fast as theirs now. Marcus felt hope growing in his chest. When the war planning first began, many experts had said it was impossible. The hegemony had thousands of ships and millions of soldiers. Humans had never even fought a battle in deep space. But every day brought new discoveries and new possibilities. Captain Laura Martinez was inspecting the first of the new warships in the construction yards orbiting Earth. The USS Freedom was twice the size of any ship humans had ever built before, and it was armed with weapons based on captured alien technology. Laura was 38 years old, one of the youngest captains in Earth's space fleet. She had been chosen to command the Freedom because of her quick thinking and her ability to make good decisions under pressure. She had also volunteered to work with the rescued aliens who were helping to plan the liberation missions. The Freedom's crew was unlike any military unit in human history. Along with 200 human soldiers and officers, the ship carried 50 aliens from different species who had escaped from slavery. They knew the layouts of hegemony facilities, the weaknesses in their security systems, and most importantly, they knew where the largest groups of slaves were being held. Crix had become the unofficial leader of the alien volunteers. His body was getting stronger every day, and his hatred for the hegemony burned like fire in his yellow eyes. He spent hours with Laura and her officers, teaching them about hegemony tactics and helping them plan rescue operations. The facility on Kepler 7 holds over 50,000 slaves, Crix explained during one of their planning meetings. Is where they process new captures before sending them to the markets. The slaves there still remember their homes and families. They have not yet been broken by years of captivity. Lieutenant Colonel Steve Parker was in charge of training the joint human-alien tactical units. Steve was a tough soldier who had led special operations teams all over Earth. Now he was learning to work with aliens who had abilities that humans could never match. Some of the alien volunteers could see in complete darkness. Others were strong enough to tear metal doors off their hinges. A few had natural abilities that let them sense when enemies were nearby. Steve's job was to figure out how to use these different abilities to free as many slaves as possible. Key is speed, Steve explained to his mixed units during training exercises. We hit the facilities hard and fast, disable their communication systems first, then move to free the prisoners. Every second we waste means more slaves might be killed by their guards. The training took place in mock-ups of hegemony facilities built from the technical data found on the captured slave ship. Human soldiers learned to work alongside aliens who moved differently, thought differently, and fought differently than any human warrior. Meanwhile, intelligence reports were coming in from all over the galaxy. Commander Ryan Walsh had managed to place tiny spy devices on several hegemony trade ships. The information they gathered painted a picture of an empire that was vast beyond imagination. Sarah Collins worked 18 hours a day decoding the intercepted communications. What she found showed that the hegemony controlled over 300 star systems and held billions of slaves from more than 1,000 different species. They're not just evil, Sarah reported to General Thompson. They're completely dependent on slavery. Their entire economy is built on free labor. They literally don't know how to do anything for themselves anymore. This discovery gave the human planners a new understanding of their enemy. The hegemony wasn't just a military force that happened to use slaves. They were a civilization that would collapse if they couldn't steal the work of others. That made them dangerous, but it also made them vulnerable. Admiral Susan Clark had been promoted to overall command of human space forces. She now oversaw the construction of over 200 warships, each one designed specifically for liberation operations. The ships were built with extra medical facilities to care for rescued slaves, and extra cargo space to carry supplies to worlds that had been stripped bare by the hegemony. We're not just going to fight them, Susan explained to her senior officers. We're going to save every being we can, and we're going to help them rebuild their worlds after we free them. The moral purpose of the war was what made everything else possible. When factory workers learned that they were building ships to free slaves, they worked extra shifts without being asked. When scientists discovered new technologies, they shared them freely with colleagues from other countries, instead of keeping secrets. Dr. Amy Peterson had learned to speak with aliens from dozens of different species. She discovered that many of them had technologies and knowledge that could help humanity. But they had been forbidden to use these abilities while they were slaves. They've been forced to act stupid and helpless for so long that many of them have forgotten how smart they really are, Amy reported. But once they realize they're truly free, they remember everything they knew before they were captured. This meant that every rescue operation was not just saving lives, but also recovering knowledge and skills that the hegemony had been wasting for centuries. As the months passed, something remarkable happened on Earth and its colonies. Crime rates dropped to almost zero. Political arguments became rare. People who had been enemies for generations began working together on projects to support the war effort. The preparation for operation. Liberation was changing humanity itself. When people had a cause worth fighting for, a reason to be proud of their species, all the petty troubles that had divided them for so long suddenly seemed unimportant. General Thompson received daily reports showing the progress of the military build-up. New ships were being launched every week, Weapons that had seemed impossible a year ago were now being mass-produced. Most importantly, the joint human-alien units were becoming more effective with every training exercise. But the most important, change was happening in the hearts and minds of ordinary people. Children in schools learned about the different alien species that humans were going to free. Workers in factories knew that every ship they built would carry hope to beings who had given up hope long ago. The hegemony had spent thousands of years perfecting their system of slavery. They had built the largest empire in the galaxy's history. They had weapons and ships and soldiers beyond counting, but they had never faced an enemy like humanity. They had never fought a species that grew stronger when they had something to protect. They had never encountered beings who would sacrifice their own comfort, safety, to help complete strangers. The hegemony thought they understood warfare. The war began without warning. At exactly 1200 hours Earth time, Admiral Thompson's fleet emerged from hyperspace at 12 different locations across hegemony territory. The USS Freedom led the largest group, appearing in orbit around Kepler-7, where the biggest slave processing center in the galaxy operated. Captain Laura Martinez stood on the bridge of the Freedom, watching the alien facility through the main screen. The processing center was enormous, bigger than any city on Earth. Thousands of ships came and went from its docking bays, carrying cargo that Laura now knew was stolen people from across the galaxy. All ships, this is Freedom Actual, Laura spoke into her communication system. Operation Liberation is now active. Remember, our job is to save lives first and destroy the enemy second. The hegemony defenders were caught completely off guard. For over 2,000 years, no one had ever attacked their facilities. The idea that someone would fight them to free slaves was so foreign to their thinking that they didn't even have proper defensive plans. Commander Ryan Walsh. Kepler-7. His soldiers wore the new combat suits that had been designed specifically for fighting in alien environments. Beside him ran Crix and 5 other former slaves who knew every corridor and security system in the facility. Remember, the guards will try to kill the slaves rather than let them be freed, Crix warned as they approached the main entrance. Would rather destroy their property than lose it to enemies. Ryan's team moved fast and quiet through the outer defenses. The hegemony guards were good soldiers, but they had been fighting primitive species with basic weapons for so long that they didn't know how to deal with humans using their own advanced technology. The first security post fell in less than 30 seconds. Ryan's soldiers used the shield-breaking weapons that Dr. Kim's team had developed, and the alien guards never had a chance to call for help. Inside the facility, the rescue teams found horrors that made even the toughest soldiers sick to their stomachs. Rows and rows of cages held beings from hundreds of different worlds. Many were so weak they could barely lift their heads when the humans arrived. "We're here to help," Ryan called out in the universal translation language that Dr. Peterson had taught them. "We're going to get you out of here." At first, the slaves didn't believe what they were seeing. Many had been captive for so long that they had given up hope of ever being free. But when they saw Crix and the other freed aliens fighting alongside the humans, they began to understand that something impossible was happening above the planet. The space battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The hegemony ships were more advanced than human vessels, but they had one major weakness. They had been designed to fight enemies who were trying to protect themselves, not enemies who were trying to save others. Admiral Susan Clark commanded the space battle from her flagship, the USS Liberation. She watched as human ships took dangerous risks to protect the rescue shuttles that were carrying freed slaves to safety. "The hegemony doesn't understand our tactics," Susan reported to Admiral Thompson. "They're trying to fight us like we're just another species trying to defend our own territory. They don't realize we're here to take everything they have." When it was over, the massive slave processing center was in human hands, and over 50,000 beings from dozens of different species were free. The hegemony defenders who survived were shocked by what they had witnessed. Colonel Janet Hill led the assault on a different target, a breeding facility in the Vega system where the hegemony had been raising slaves like farm animals. For over 500 years, what her team found there was beyond anything they had prepared for. General, you need to see these reports, Janet said during a video call with Earth Command. They've been breeding people for specific traits: strength, intelligence, obedience. Some of these beings have never seen the outside of this facility. Some of the older slaves had been bred for so many generations that they no longer remembered what their original species had looked like. The worst part, Janet continued, is that many of them are afraid to leave. They've been told their whole lives that the outside universe is dangerous and that they're safe only as long as they obey their masters. Dr. Amy Peterson was part of Janet's team, working to communicate with slaves who spoke languages that had changed over centuries of captivity. Some groups had developed their own ways of talking that mixed words from dozens of different worlds. It's going to take years to help some of these people remember who they really are, Amy reported. But they're starting to understand. When they see humans risking their lives to save strangers, it gives them hope they never thought they could feel again. The news of the attack spread quickly through hegemony space. Barabunita, for the first time in their long history, the slave masters were afraid. Species that had been their partners in the slave trade began to worry that they might be next on humanity's list, the hegemony. High Council met an emergency session on their capital world. These were beings who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years, who had never known anything but absolute power over other species. "Who are these humans?" demanded the council leader, a creature that looked like a giant spider with too many eyes. "Why are they attacking our facilities?" "They claim they are freeing slaves," reported the military commander, whose species looked like walking sharks with arms. But that makes no sense. No species fights wars to free other species. Everyone knows that. Perhaps they want to take over our slave operations for themselves, suggested the trade minister. Maybe they plan to become the new masters of the galaxy. But as more reports came in from the battlefields, it became clear that the humans were not trying to take over the slave trade. They were actually destroying it. Every facility they captured was converted into a hospital and refugee center. Every slave ship they found was turned into a transport to carry freed beings back to their home worlds. The hegemony leadership began to panic. Their entire civilization was built on the work of slaves. If the slaves were freed, the hegemony would collapse within years. They had forgotten how to do any real work themselves. "We must stop them," the council leader declared. "Send the Grand Fleet to destroy these humans before they can spread their madness to other species." The Grand Fleet was the largest military force the hegemony had ever assembled. Over 2,000 ships, carrying millions of soldiers, all heading toward human space to end the threat to their way of life. But humanity was ready for them. Admiral Thompson had been expecting a massive counterattack, and he had prepared a surprise that the hegemony would never see coming. Commander Walsh had managed to place spy devices throughout hegemony space during the early battles. Grand Fleet began moving toward Earth. Humans knew about it immediately, bringing everything they have, Sarah Collins reported from her intelligence station. Every major warship, every elite unit, every weapon system they've developed over the past 1,000 years. Good Admiral Thompson replied. "That means when we destroy their fleet, the war will be over." The final battle was planned to take place near a star system called Wolf 359, halfway between Earth and the main hegemony territories. Admiral Thompson assembled every human ship and called for volunteers from the species they had already freed. The response was overwhelming. Beings who had been slaves just weeks before volunteered to fight alongside their human liberators. Former prisoners became soldiers, fighting to free others who were still in chains. Captain Martinez prepared the USS Freedom for what everyone knew would be the most important battle in galactic history. Her crew now included beings from over 30 different species, all united by their hatred of slavery and their gratitude to humanity. "If we lose this battle, the hegemony will enslave Earth and every world we've freed," Laura told her crew. "But if we win, slavery dies forever in this galaxy." Crix had been promoted to the rank of commander in the human fleet, the first alien ever to hold such a position. He stood beside Laura on the bridge, his yellow eyes focused on the enemy fleet that was approaching through hyperspace. "They still do not understand," Crix said quietly. "They think this is just another war for territory and resources. They have no idea that you humans are fighting for something they cannot comprehend." What's that? Laura asked. The idea that every thinking being deserves to be free, Crix replied. It is such a simple concept, but it is the most powerful force in the universe. The hegemony has never faced an enemy that fights for ideas instead of profit. The enemy fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, confident that their superior numbers and technology would win the day. The hegemony commanders expected the humans to surrender when they saw how outnumbered they were. Instead, Admiral Thompson broadcast a message to the enemy fleet that was heard across half the galaxy. This is Admiral Thompson of the Human Liberation Fleet. You have one chance to surrender and release all slaves under your control. If you refuse, we will destroy every ship in your fleet and free every being you have enslaved. The final battle at Wolf 359 lasted for 3 days. The hegemony Grand Fleet had more ships and bigger weapons, but they had never fought an enemy like humanity before. Every time the alien commanders thought they understood human tactics, Admiral Thompson's forces did something that made no sense according to traditional military thinking. Human. Ships deliberately put themselves in danger to protect vessels carrying freed slaves to safety. Captains sacrificed their own ships to save alien beings they had never met before. The concept was so foreign to the hegemony mindset that their battle plans fell apart within hours. Captain Laura Martinez fought the USS Freedom through wave. After a wave of enemy attacks, her mixed crew of humans and former slaves worked together like they had been training for years instead of months. When the ship's shields failed, alien crew members with natural resistance to radiation went outside to make repairs while the battle continued around them. They're breaking formation, reported Lieutenant Commander Crix from his position at the tactical station. The enemy commanders are starting to panic. I cannot understand why we keep fighting when we could retreat. Admiral Thompson watched the battle from his command ship, making decisions that would have seemed insane to any military leader in galactic history. When the enemy concentrated their fire on his largest vessels, he ordered those ships to ram straight into the enemy formation, using them as shields to protect the smaller rescue ships. Sir, we're losing too many ships, one of his officers warned. Maybe we should pull back and regroup. No, Thompson replied firmly. Every minute we delay means more slaves die in their facilities. We end this today, no matter what it costs us. The turning point came when Commander Ryan Walsh led a desperate assault on the hegemony command ship. His boarding party included soldiers from 12 different species, all former slaves who wanted revenge against their captors. The assault team fought their way through corridor after corridor of the massive alien warship. The hegemony defenders were skilled warriors, but they had been trained to fight enemies who valued their own lives above everything else. They didn't know how to deal with soldiers who cared more about freeing others than surviving themselves. Ryan and his team reached the command bridge just as the hegemony admiral was ordering the destruction of slave facilities throughout their territory. The alien commander preferred to kill all his slaves rather than let them be freed by humans. Stop. The order, Ryan demanded, pointing his weapon at the alien admiral. The hegemony commander looked at Ryan with contempt. You cannot win, human. Even if you destroy this fleet, we have thousands more ships. We will hunt your species to extinction for what you have done. Still don't understand, Ryan said quietly. This isn't about winning or losing. This is about right and wrong. We're going to keep fighting until every slave in the galaxy is free? Crix stepped forward, his yellow eyes burning with hatred for the creature that had ordered the capture and torture of his people. You made one mistake, he told the alien admiral. You let us survive long enough to meet humans. Now, your 1,000-year reign of terror is over. The hegemony command ship surrendered minutes later, and the rest of their fleet began to break apart. Many alien ships tried to escape back to their home territories, but human forces were waiting for them at every jump point. The victory at Wolf 359 was just the beginning. Over the next 18 months, human and allied forces swept through hegemony space like a storm. Every slave facility was captured and converted into a refugee center. Every slave ship was turned into a transport to carry freed beings home to worlds they hadn't seen in decades. General Marcus Thompson established the Galactic Liberation, his command on the former hegemony capital world. The planet that had once been the center of the largest slave empire in history, became headquarters for the greatest rescue operation ever attempted. Dr. Amy Peterson worked around the clock to help freed slaves reconnect with their lost cultures and languages. Many species had been enslaved for so long that they had forgotten their own histories. Children who had been born in captivity had no idea what their homeworlds looked like. "It's going to take generations to undo the damage that was done," Amy reported to the Liberation Command. "But every day we see progress. Families are being reunited. Languages that were almost lost are being spoken again. Cultures that the hegemony tried to destroy are coming back to life." The most difficult part was dealing with the hegemony leadership themselves. These were beings who had built their entire civilization on the suffering of others. When their slave empire collapsed, many of them couldn't understand how to live without owning other people. Admiral Susan Clark oversaw the trials of hegemony war criminals. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Records of billions of beings bought and sold like animals, entire species driven to extinction by slavery. Children bred in captivity and sold to the highest bidders. "Some of them still don't think they did anything wrong," Susan reported to Earth Command. "They keep asking when they'll get their property back. They can't comprehend that slaves are people with rights." The trials were broadcast across the galaxy so that every species could see justice being done. Former slaves testified about the horrors they had endured. The evidence was so overwhelming that even the hegemony's former allies abandoned them. Colonel Stavarka led the teams that dismantled the last of the slave facilities. His soldiers, working alongside freed aliens, destroyed the breeding centers where people had been raised like livestock. They tore down the auction platforms where families had been separated forever. "Every facility we close means this can never happen again," Steve told his troops. "We're not just winning a war, we're making sure our children will live in a galaxy where slavery is just a horrible memory." The final assault came at Hegemony Prime itself, the capital world where the alien overlords had ruled for over 2,000 years. Admiral Thompson personally led the fleet that surrounded the planet, demanding unconditional surrender. The Hegemony High Council made one last desperate attempt to save themselves. They offered to make humanity junior partners in a reformed slave empire, promising humans a share of the profits if they would stop the liberation. "You could rule alongside us," the council leader transmitted to Thompson's fleet. "Your species could have anything you want. Planets, resources, even slaves of your own. Why fight us when you could join us?" Thompson's response was broadcast to every world in the galaxy. "We didn't come here to rule anyone, came here to free everyone. Your offer is rejected. Surrender now or face the consequences." The final battle for Hegemony Prime lasted only 6 hours. The planet's defenses had been designed to protect the ruling class from slave uprisings, not from a coordinated assault by the most advanced military force in the galaxy. Commander Rodriguez led the assault on the High Council chambers. The alien overlords who had condemned billions to slavery tried to hide in their deepest bunkers. But human forces found them anyway. When the fighting ended, the last of the hegemony leadership were captured. Beings who had never known anything but absolute power over others found themselves in chains for the first time in their lives. The liberation of Hegemony Prime freed the largest concentration of slaves in the galaxy. Over 200 million beings from more than 300 different species. Many had been slaves for so long they didn't remember their real names or where they had come from originally. President Linda Ways, Washington arrived on Hegemony Prime to personally oversee the transition. Standing in the same chamber where billions of beings had been sentenced to slavery, she spoke to representatives from every freed species in the galaxy. "Today marks the end of the darkest chapter in galactic history," she announced. "Never again will sentient beings be bought and sold like property. Never again will families be torn apart for profit. Never again will anyone suffer in chains while others live in freedom." Captain Martinez was promoted to admiral and given command of the new Galactic Patrol, a joint force made up of ships and crews from dozens of different worlds. Their mission was to make sure slavery could never return to any part of the galaxy. The hegemony's vast wealth, accumulated through thousands of years of stolen labor, was redistributed to help rebuild the civilizations that had been destroyed. By slavery, planets that had been stripped bare were replanted. Cities that had been burned were rebuilt. Technologies that had been suppressed were shared freely among all species. Dr. Peter Kim led the effort to convert former slave ships into exploration vessels. The same technology that had been used to transport captives across the galaxy was now being used to reunite families and explore new worlds, where freed beings could start fresh lives. 50 years after the war ended, Ambassador Lisa Hayes stood before the Galactic Council, representing Earth at the ceremony marking the anniversary of liberation. She was old now, her hair white and her hands wrinkled. But her eyes still shone with the same determination that had driven humanity to war. The council chamber was filled with representatives from over 400 different worlds, each one a free society that had risen from the ashes of the hegemony.